Hello beautiful people and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm gonna be talking about something I'm very passionate about, and that's making videos. So I asked you guys a couple of times what kind of videos you'd like to see from me, and probably 80% of the replies said that you'd like to see how I film and edit my videos. And to be honest, you could hardly find a topic I'm more passionate about, so I could go on about making videos for hours and hours and hours, but I don't want to do that, at least not in one video. So I thought I would start a series about how I make YouTube videos. Now, there are a lot of topics I can cover in this series, like advice for beginners, equipment, filming, editing, and so on, but I don't want my channel to be all about this series, so I'm gonna make one video each month and add it to this playlist. So I'm going to put the playlist link in the description. Of course, if you're watching this video right when I upload it, it will be the only video in that playlist, but if you're finding it at a later time, then you will be able to see all the other videos I made in this series. So before we start this video, I need to add a disclaimer before I get angry comments from professional filmmakers that I am by no means a professional. I am very well aware of that, and I'm also open to any kind of criticism, so if I say anything incorrectly, just feel free to correct me in the comments. I will not be offended, I promise. So in today's video, I'm gonna talk about 5 mistakes I see a lot of YouTubers make. And I watched a couple of these videos on YouTube and I felt like most of them focus on what to do or what not to do, how to decide what content you make, how to make your thumbnail and stuff like that. But I want to talk more from a technical aspect, what kind of technical mistakes I see a lot of people make. Number 1, overusing stabilization. So one mistake very commonly made is using stabilization even when it's not working right. So what stabilization does is it analyzes your footage, it analyzes for dominant motion, and it will zoom in a bit so it can get rid of the shakiness of your footage. But to be able to do that, you have to have a clip with little to no movement to begin with. This means you will either have to shoot from one angle only, or you will have to have a consistent camera movement. Now, if stabilization works, you will get a smooth outcome, but if it doesn't, stabilization will distort the background of your footage and it will kind of look like you were shooting underwater. You can adjust the sliders a bit, but in my experience, it doesn't help much. So my advice is, if stabilization distorts your footage, just leave it as it was, because a little shaky footage is still better than a wobbly one. Or if you shot your video in the right frame rate, you can also slow it down, because slow motion will get rid of some of the shakiness. Speaking of slowing down your footage, number 2, slow motion with the wrong frame rate. If you're planning to slow down your footage in editing, you need to plan ahead and shoot the actual footage in a higher frame rate. So let's say you have a 1 second long clip that you shot at 30 frames per second and you want to slow it down to half its original speed. So what happens then is your original 1 second will now be 2 seconds long, but since there are only 30 frames that you actually shot, it will now have to cover 2 seconds, so you are down to 15 frames per second. So the thing is, the most natural to the human eye is 24 frames per second, so anything less than that will seem very laggy or seem like a stop motion movie, so definitely do not slow down your footage if it was shot in 30 or 25 frames per second. If you're planning to slow down your video, then shoot at a higher frame rate, like 60 or 50 frames per second, depending on the video system you use, which we will talk about in a minute. Because if you have a 1 second long clip with 60 frames in it and you want to slow it down to half its speed, it will become a 2 seconds long clip with 30 frames in each second, just like your original footage. If you want super slow motion, you can set the frame rate to 120 frames per second and then you can slow it down 4 times, but that's usually only an option in very expensive cameras, like even my camera doesn't have it. Honestly, me being very lazy, I just use a higher frame rate all the time in case I ever decide to slow it down, and that's definitely not something you should do if you're a filmmaker or if you want to shoot professionally, and I'm pretty sure that any professional filmmakers would bang their heads in the wall if you saw someone shooting at a higher frame rate all the time. But in my experience, it is perfectly okay for YouTube videos. It doesn't change much. It will obviously result in a larger file size, but if that doesn't bother you, I see no problem with using a higher frame rate all the time for YouTube videos. Just make sure that when you're editing and creating a new project, then your project is in the normal frame rate, like 30 or 25. Number 3, flickering lights and black bars. Now, this is something I see all the time in YouTube videos. You might have experienced it yourself if you're making videos that you're shooting a continuous light source, but when you watch it back on your footage, it just have an excessive flicker, or that you see black bars in your footage when you're using artificial lights, like turning on your ceiling lamp or something. And this can have multiple reasons, but I'm going to try to explain how it works so that you can identify the problem if that happens to you. So before I start explaining this, I just want you to know that I'm neither a physicist nor an engineer, and also English is not my first language, so my explanation might be a bit lousy, so please excuse me for that, but I'm gonna try my best to explain it as well as I can. The first thing we need to understand here is that, as I mentioned, there are multiple video systems that you can use when you're shooting a video. So if you check the settings in your camera, you can choose from 2 video systems. One is called NTSC and the other one is called PAL. The difference between these 2 systems is the base frame rate. NTSC has a base frame rate of 30, so you can either shoot at 30, 60 or 120 frames per second, and PAL has the base frame rate of 25, so you can shoot in 25, 50 or 100 frames per second. Now, this was very important back in the days of analog television, but now in the digital era, it doesn't really matter which one you use unless you're using artificial lights. And now for the hard part to explain. So this whole thing comes down to electricity. So the electricity carried in our power lines is alternating current, or better known as AC. That means that the current is not just flowing in one direction, but it keeps changing directions all the time because it's more sustainable like that. And the power line frequency number of your country indicates how many times the current will change directions within a second. So in the US and Japan and some other countries, the power line frequency is 60 Hz, so that means that the current will change direction 60 times within a second, and the rest of the world uses 50 Hz. So when it comes to lighting, this change will cause a slight flickering in the light because the light itself will lose power every time the current changes directions. But of course, it's such a short time that it will hardly be able to make a change in the amount of light, and your own eyes will definitely won't be able to see it, but your camera can capture it if the frame rate is not aligned with your power line frequency, because then the moment your camera captures a frame will not be aligned with the moments when the lighting is in the same range. I have no idea if this makes any sense or if it's understandable at all, but I hope you get what I'm trying to say. This will result in either black interference bars on your footage or excessive flickering on the light that is actually not flickering at all. So if you want to avoid that, make sure to always use the video system that's right for your country. Now, this can also be affected by your shutter speed, so whenever you're shooting with artificial lights, just make sure to set your shutter speed to double your frame rate. So since most of the times I'm shooting in 50 frames per second, I set my shutter speed at 100. Now, one more thing that's important for us non-US people is that this only goes for lighting. If you want to capture, let's say, your TV, like I do many times when I talk about my day, it will not be based on your power line frequency, but rather on the screen's refresh rate itself, which is normally 60 Hz. So yeah, it's kind of complicated. So let's say you want to shoot your TV or your phone with artificial lights in the background. Well, that sucks. In my experience, what helps sometimes is that when I set the video system to one frame rate and then the shutter speed to another, but this what I'm talking about is so unprofessional. It's just a kind of workaround that worked for me once or twice. It's just a tip for you all if you ever get into this situation, but let's face it, it doesn't happen every day. But if any of you has an official solution to this problem, please share it with me in the comments. Number 4, not paying attention to the audio. Now, this is something I'm a huge advocate for because, trust me, audio will give like 70% of your final outcome. It has many aspects like good audio quality, choosing the right music, setting the volume levels right when editing, and so on. I know that starting a YouTube channel can be very costly because you want to buy a camera, a lens, lighting, a microphone, but honestly, don't save money on not buying a microphone. The built-in camera microphone doesn't have a very good quality, and it just takes your videos to the next level when you have nice quality and crispy audio. You can get a pretty good Rode microphone in a $60 to $100 range. I got mine for $100 like 7 years ago, and apart from the cat mistaking it for a cat toy sometimes, it's still in perfect condition, so I absolutely recommend buying a microphone. Also be aware that it's not just having a microphone that makes a huge change in your audio quality, but also where you place it. If you're attaching your microphone on top of your camera but your camera's too far away from you, it will not be a lot better quality than using the built-in camera microphone. Also, you will probably be able to hear the lens focusing when you're moving around. A lot of people just use a tripod and hang their microphone above them so it's not in the frame, which works of course, but what I do is I use a tripod that's absolutely not meant for this purpose and just use an extender cable to connect it with my camera and then move the microphone as close to me as possible without being in the picture. Honestly, this is how I started it at first, and ever since then I just never felt like I need to change it. Another aspect that's very important when it comes to audio quality is the volume levels. Many beginners make the mistake of not having consistent volume levels, and then when they speak it's like very quiet, and then the music starts and it's really loud. Or another mistake I see all the time is that they are talking and the background music is so loud that it's very distracting from what they're saying. So make sure that you align all the audio levels to each other. Set the talking audio to a level you feel like it's easier to understand, and then set everything else compared to that so that the music is not much louder or quieter. Or if you're recording voiceovers too, just try to make it as loud as the talking part so that it's not so obvious that they were recorded with a different microphone. Also, the same goes for sound effects. I think it's very annoying when you hear a sound effect and it's so much louder than the actual video. So make sure that you pay attention to the audio levels, because that will make a huge difference in the final outcome. Also, one more thing, if you have some parts in your video that only plays music, make sure to gradually increase or decrease the volume instead of just jumping from quiet to loud or from loud to quiet. It feels so much better if you just do it gradually instead of jumping around. Number 5, relying on equipment to make better videos. So I watched quite a few videos on how to start a YouTube channel, and I feel like people mostly talk about equipment when it comes to video quality. In most of these videos, they tell you that you can just start out with a phone because most phones have great quality cameras these days, and that's actually true. And sure enough, you can find a lot of videos on YouTube where professionals show you how they're shooting with a phone, and you can hardly tell the difference between that and something they shot with an expensive gear. But what most of these people fail to mention is that no matter what kind of equipment you have, you will not be able to use it right if you don't know what you're doing. Equipment is absolutely secondary to knowledge. Sure enough, you can make good quality videos with your phone, but you need to know what you're doing. So don't skip the learning phase. Just learn the basics of videography, because YouTube is a very competitive place. So if you want to get successful, you need to do it right. It is absolutely not to discourage anyone. On the contrary, I want you to understand that making videos takes practice. But trust me, once you learn and improve, it will make you feel so good. So don't give up at first when you feel like your videos are not as good as you want to. Good news is that there are thousands of tutorial videos on YouTube for free, and if you really put your time and effort into it, you can greatly improve your skills within a couple of months. Also, now that we brought up the camera or phone debate, I feel like I just need to put my 2 cents in about that. I know that a lot of people encourage others to use their phones for filming, and I agree that phones have a pretty decent camera quality these days. But in my opinion, it's so much harder to learn filming on a phone because it just gives you way less control and settings to choose than a camera. So my advice is, if you can afford it, just buy a camera. And of course, I'm not talking about the multiple $1,000 worth cameras. I bought my first camera with a pretty decent lens for $250, and I gradually upgraded when I started making money. And it was actually my fourth or fifth camera that I bought new, and all the others I bought used. A camera will give you a lot more freedom to change settings, and honestly, in retrospect, 7 years after I started making videos, I feel like this was the right choice I made, because now I'm able to use my phone for filming, but that requires the knowledge I got from using a camera. And I know that not everyone can afford even a used camera, and I understand that, but unfortunately filmmaking is a very, very expensive hobby, which sucks. And talking about camera settings, just one last thing I wanted to add is don't use it on automatic settings. Even if you just learn the very, very basic things that you can adjust on a camera, it will just give you a tremendous amount of creative freedom that you can use to make your videos look better. So when you're starting out with filming, before you even do any shooting, make sure you learn the 3 basic things you can set in your camera: the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. And trust me, it will kickstart your improvement later. So definitely do not skip the basics. See, I told you I can go on and on about making videos, so if you have any requests for the next episode of this series, let me know in a comment. I really hope you liked this video. If you did, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. I upload new videos every week from now on Saturdays at 3 p.m. GMT. Thank you for being here, and I can't wait to see you next week. Bye.